speaking, then Zoom doesn't tend to record your face in full recording. So yeah, if you don't want to show on the recording, don't say anything, and feel free to turn your camera off. But yeah, that's a really good point, Martin. Thanks. So I won't ramble anymore, and I'll pass straight over to Vix if that press release is all done.
Hi, yes, thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much for inviting me. It has been quite a busy day, as Martin just indicated there. I know that the National Education Union have been in Zoom calls, the executive, since 8:30 this morning, with a lot of things to deal with and to tackle. So I hope to bring you a little bit up to date with some of the calls that I've been on involving with the National Education Union, and our response as the Green Party to the current situation. But myself, I've been a teaching union member ever since I first went into teaching in 1998, when I first trained. That was the National Union of Teachers, which is now the National Education Union, which is the biggest education union in Europe, I understand, and covers not just teachers, but, as we are now framing, educators. So that is support staff, that is all staff that are involved in education can join. So I've been a union member much longer than I've been a member of the Green Party. As a union member, I have gone on strike before now over pay and conditions, and most of that was during a Labour government, but I've never had to take action as a matter of health and safety. But I am going to be doing that as of Monday, and I'm going to be writing and contacting my head teacher this weekend, and I hope I can update you as to how the union is going about that. But firstly, just a little bit of an analysis about what's happened in the last 9 months of being a school worker. In March, we were ordered to close the schools with 48 hours notice, but on the days leading up to that, students and parents had voted with their feet. They knew before the government that this was a serious situation, and we're in that situation again, where the workers and the parents and the families and the communities are much more concerned about this virus than the government, which is a terrible situation for us to be in. We had lessons online, but we'd had no staff training or safeguarding on how to deliver live lessons. What will happen in the coming weeks will be very different to how education was set in March. And the effect on the disadvantaged young people in our community is not because of the lack of planning from teachers. It's for the lack of planning from our government to be able to provide the laptops and the connectivity and so on for our young people. April, May, I had to predict GCSE and A-level grades set by staff. I was overruled. I went back again, and I was overruled again in August. Terrible situation again. It looks like we're going to be facing the same thing in the summer. Could so easily be avoided. In June, I went back into school, but this time it was small classes. I had classes of 10. Right, distance classes, socially distanced classes. This is not what school has been like since September. And then obviously in the summer we had the exams debacle, the U-turns, and the Young Greens were central to making that happen and supporting our young people. And again, great tribute to the Young Greens and the work that they did in August. In September, our schools went back, but fully open. No rotas, no masks, no screens, no testing, no PPE, no social distancing, no laptops. It's the very fact that teachers and educators and support staff have got us through one term with that is testament to the hard work of our workers in schools. And in November, when we were going to the lockdown, the Green Party officially called for schools to be included in this national lockdown, because we knew it was not going to be effective unless we were included. But schools weren't included, and now we've seen the mutation of the virus and the situation in December where virus levels are astronomically high. And the government's response to this was threatening Greenwich Council with court injunctions and legal action rather than supporting their cause to protect their workers and their young people. Now we've got 900 deaths a day, 57,000 cases in the last 24 hours. And locally, a much loved learning support assistant at my son's school died last week from pneumonia after contracting coronavirus. You know, these are people's lives that are at stake in our schools, not just teachers, not just young people, but the whole community. And unbelievably, inexplicably, our government is refusing to move all our schools to distance learning, or to cancel the exams in the summer, or to come up with a long-term sustainable plan. Instead, their plan seems to be these lateral flow tests, which we know are not reliable, how they are going to be administered, who is going to administer them, where these are going to be administered, what will happen to young people if they test positive. So many questions. But the whole of government's plan is these tests that they're going to do in school, and vaccination that is not even being offered to teachers, and certainly not to young people. Now, as a teacher, as a Green, as a parent, I know that closing schools has to be a last resort. We do not want to shut our schools. Our young people need that regular social educational interaction. However, it's got to that last resort situation. We're at a crisis point. And from this morning, I've been in a call with 4,000, 5,000 other reps for the National Education Union, with our chief secretaries. I have also booked in to be on a call tomorrow, which there's 15,000 booked on the call. There's a 20,000 limit, so they're going to put it all on social media tomorrow at 11 a.m. So please join in. The National Education Union are not just working by themselves. They have been in constant contact with school leaders unions as well, who have said that they are, quote, sympathetic to what the National Education Union are proposing. So in the call this morning, we were told that the National Education Union executive have endorsed a strategy paper. We are not talking about a strike, as I'm sure you're aware. You know, firstly, in terms of public support at the moment, when we have got NHS workers, you know, frontline workers, key workers, you know, teachers need to pull their weight as well. So this is not a strike. This is advice and a strategy paper to move to distance learning, for teachers to not go into school. And this strategy paper that they've endorsed has been informed by science. They're very clear on that. SAGE and Independent SAGE have both said you cannot get the R below 1 unless the school's closed. So this paper's been informed by science. It's also been informed by the context and experience of our teachers. So as we were coming to the Christmas break, the levels of the virus in schools was so high, and we can see that now with the new variant and the graphs with young people. Young people are transmitting this virus, this new strain that they have not done before. And we know that this has meant a lot of disruption, out of isolation, and an inability for teachers to do their job. So it's also been informed by the commitment of union members to provide high quality and sustainable education. We know that we cannot keep going in, out, you know, regardless of the fact that this is affecting people's health and putting lives in danger. This is not the way in which to plan the next few weeks and months of learning. So immediately we have a situation on Monday morning where primary school teachers and support assistants and dinner staff and parents and children are all supposed to be in school. So the union has advised all primary school teachers to write to their heads using section 44 of the health and safety part of our employment, saying that schools are unsafe. They are unsafe for people to be in school teaching full classes, and therefore those people who are not clinically vulnerable should be in a position to be able to do some sort of key worker or vulnerable children support, but everybody else will be working from home. They're going to provide a template letter to all primary school staff, but as a secondary school teacher, I'm also going to be writing to my head teacher over the weekend, because I'm expected to be in work on Tuesday morning every day for the next few weeks, regardless of whether my students are working at home. I'm supposed to be delivering all those lessons inside my classroom with all other teachers, which I'm not supporting at all. All workers have a right not to work in unsafe settings, and that doesn't matter whether it's our own personal safety, but the safety of colleagues or the people that we work with, the young people we work with. So it's not saying it's just that I personally feel unsafe, but that the whole building, the institution, is unsafe. So it doesn't have to relate specifically to us. So finally, as part of this discussion, is how can we, as a Green Party, support the union, and looking more likely plural, the unions on this. Even the NASUWT has come out and said that all learning should be moving to online. The head teacher unions are, quote, sympathetic to what the National Education Union is saying. Now, in the next few hours, the NEU are going to put together a petition. They did one in the summer. 450,000 people signed it. So this is a petition for everybody, not just union members, to sign and to share, to insist that we should be working online at this time. And I think also we need to publicly support this action. Remember, it's not strike action, it's action to move to distance learning. And obviously we can do that in social media, but I've already written to my local paper, my local radio, to say that I support this action of the union. I think that's really important to express solidarity with the union in this. There are some members that, especially in primary schools, there may only be one or two of them in that primary school that are going to have to write to their head teacher. So we really need, as a party, I think, to support this action. Since lunchtime, I've contacted external communications and the press office, as I was doing beforehand, and it looks like a press release is imminent. In fact, 2 minutes ago, I'm told, also involving Brighton and Hove Council as well, who are also concerned about the situation, which is really good that it's not just the leaders or myself there. So please keep an eye out for that. But I'm very happy to hear from any other union members' advice as to how we can support our school week workers. Initially, we're saying working at home, working online for the next 2 weeks. But I think this is going to last a lot longer than that. I think minimum we're looking into next month. I was discussing with Pete Murray earlier about the situation in our FE colleges, in our higher education, where they're saying that non-essential learning should be online until Easter. You know, this may be a long time, and we do need to make sure that we support our union on this, because certainly our government are inexplicably not putting forward and prioritising the health and safety of our young people and our parents and our teachers and our educators. So we have got to step in, and we've got to do that as well. So I'm looking forward to any questions that you've got or any advice you've got on how, as a union and as a party, we can support our union. Thank you.
So much, Vix. That was great. Really sort of like barnstorming. Obviously, like a lot of just a lot of anger. I guess this is the point where we open up to any questions, or anyone who sort of wants to wants to add something or say something about the situation where they are, and about any ideas they have for ways to offer practical solidarity. I wanted to sort of take advantage of the fact that I'm chairing this and sneak one in. So I guess the one thing I'd be quite interested to hear is how you're feeling, Vix, about what the sort of, like, how many teachers you think will take action on Monday by citing Section 44, by refusing to go in. discussions have been like at sort of at a branch level? And also, you mentioned that some of the school leaders were sort of quote unquote sympathetic, and I guess it's hard to tell how that will sort of play out in real terms. But are we, should we be expecting school management to be responding with discipline or with understanding? And do you think that they'll take a sympathetic approach?
I think it's very difficult. I think that it really depends what your boss is like on this. I think my boss is somewhere in the middle. He wants to do what the government tell him to do. He doesn't want to put his head over the parapet, because obviously, his backup is to say, well, the government told me to do this. I was just following orders. There are other head teachers who, as one of my fellow branch reps said at lunchtime, they are more scared of the head teacher than they are of the virus. They're very worried, colleagues that are writing in with a Section 44. And yet there are other head teachers who already, secondary schools, have said they're doing online learning all this week and nobody is due in. So it's completely variable, really. I know that, I'm in a relatively large federation. It's not an academy trust. It's 3 different sites. So we have about 150, 200 members of staff across these sites, and they're expecting us to go into work. I think, to be fair to head teachers, this is unprecedented. I know that's the first time I've said it in 2021. It's the word of 2020, isn't it? I think really it's going to depend a lot of this on how parents and the wider community, how much solidarity and support they have for teachers, and that may well encourage other people. I know the union has had new members joining. I know that the union has got non-members due to be in the meeting tomorrow. So I think that there is an expression of solidarity coming, regardless of which union you're in or whether you're not in one. But I think it's the wider community support that's really going to be needed here. Similar to when we supported all the NHS workers, and inexplicably, again, we don't seem to be doing that right now. I know the majority of the public are, but ways in which we can express that support is really important, especially if you're a union member who's doing this action by themselves. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I can see sort of hands going up. You can either gesture with your hand or use the Zoom raise hand function. I can see. Let's go to Melanie, who I think has a question.
Yeah. Hi, Vix. I don't think I could have been any more equivocal or unequivocal in my support for the unions over the last sort of few weeks. But the sort of recurring question that would be helpful if we knew what the union's position is around safeguarding and vulnerable children. Obviously, schools will remain open to them, and largely I'm very aware of the fact that there has been no support from central government to provide any sort of alternative to the sort of support that they get from teachers in school. But that is a recurring question, and obviously with the sort of caveat is some children are known about in advance, but some will just present themselves randomly out of the blue as being a child who is in desperate need of help. And that has a potential to be overlooked. Where do we go and what do we say as a party in response to those sorts of questions and challenges would be really helpful to know.
Yeah, that is such an important question. And again, it's incredibly frustrating that 9 months down the line, we haven't moved any further on that.
Yes.
The solution from the government seems to be schools must remain open. But without providing the PPE, the tests or the masks or the social distancing or the rotors or the laptops, it's just not been possible. I know that in the union call this morning, people from special schools in particular, where vulnerability is designated as having EHCP, which is not necessarily the case. That's what vulnerable children have. EHCP does not mean vulnerable, and neither does no EHCP mean not vulnerable. Identifying those young people, again, it's unfortunately down to the quality of the head teacher. We've seen some amazing head teachers and senior leaders, going out, delivering food, seeing everybody. But it's so disparate on there. That's why I was making sure that in the press release we did address, disadvantage in that. It's not just a case of supporting the unions. We also need to make sure that we're aware that there is huge issues of equality and safeguarding involved here. I would hope that there'll be much more support from government with that, but as we've seen from the free school meals situation, it's not there. But yes, making sure that we talk about that, and that we have that schools are supported to be putting the safeguarding measures in place is really important. But this is why we wanted to keep schools open. This is why we needed a rota system. This is why we needed to have at least everybody in every morning, or 1 week on, 1 week off. That's how to get a sustainable point of contact with especially these vulnerable families. And unfortunately, it's looking like we're pushed to the position of last resort and a crisis situation again.
I agree.
Great.
And thanks for all your support with it, Melanie. You were saying about the unions. You know, there's some National Education Union members who are absolutely frustrated with the Labour Party on this.
Yeah.
The Labour Party, their stance seems to be pointing fingers at the government for inducing chaos, which obviously is correct. However, that's not tackling the situation and supporting and stopping the virus and supporting staff who are dying, and young people who have contracted the virus and passed it on to elder members of their family from schools. We need to be much clearer and much more supportive of the unions, and there is a big gap here that we've seen with a Keir Starmer-led Labour Party, where they're not, as a party, individual MPs, they are expressing support, but as a party, they've really not supported the union enough on this. And this is where we as a party need to make sure we do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kate Green and Keir Starmer have been poor in their responses. I've been really very surprised to see when they quite happily take, I'm sure, a significant donation from the teaching unions into the party, that there is just a willful blindness to what's actually going on and the reality that our teachers are facing, and it's terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, as individual teachers, many members are members of the Labour Party, but as a National Education Union and a lot of teaching unions are unaffiliated. And I think this shows the strength with being unaffiliated, that actually, you know, it's good for Greens to be able to make sure that we can support them. They don't have to support the Labour Party, they can also support us too. Yeah,
absolutely.
Great. Just scanning for hands. I can see one from, is it Ali? Yeah.
Hello, Ali McNamara from Reading, and I'm just.
Hi, Ali.
Hi, Vix. And I was at that meeting as well with you today, because I'm district and branch secretary for the NEU in Reading. Something I was picking up on what you said, Vix, about public perception and about the, you know, it's a very brave thing that anyone's going to have to do if they're going to have to write a letter to their head teacher to say they don't feel their workplace is safe. It's an incredibly brave thing to do, and it's a very individual thing to do. And one of the misconceptions that we've had all the way through is that when schools aren't open for everybody, that teachers aren't doing anything, and supply and support staff are not doing anything. They're just sitting around eating biscuits and drinking cups of tea. But I have never known anybody work as hard as our staff have worked when they've been having to do this, teaching live classes and doing blended learning at home, learning new skills. They are working incredibly hard. I don't know a single member of staff who would prefer to be working at home remotely. They all are much happier when they're in school. I've not had anybody say, I would rather be doing this all the time. They really do prefer to be in there with the children. They're very reluctant if they don't feel safe going into the workplace, and they don't feel it's safe for the wider community. It's not just thinking of me, it's thinking of everybody else in my community. So I think that's really important that we sort of get that across, that it's really hard work and that nobody wants to be doing this.
Yes, spot on. I mean, people that go into work with young people, we're people. We don't want to sit there at a computer. We want to actually meet people, social people. But you make a really good point there, that I think parents are quite fearful that online learning will be the same as what happened in March. But what happened in March was a crisis situation with 48 hours notice. You know, since then, since October the 22nd, all schools have had to have in place immediate online learning. So obviously this is applicable to people who are privileged enough to have connectivity and have electronic equipment. But those people who do have access to that will be able to do live lessons. I will be doing live lessons, you know, with my year 13s, with my year 12s. I will be doing that. It's not going to be necessarily the same as what happened in March and April. But also, from a duty of care, we contacted regularly, weekly or daily for the vulnerable children, and we contacted people. We did a lot of stuff that wasn't just educational. We did a lot of pastoral stuff as well. So it's not the case that there's presenteeism, and this is a situation that I'm in personally with my boss, is I'm supposed to be at work on Tuesday just because they want me to be present in the building. Not that means I'm going to be doing anything with people. So there is a presenteeism in the way in which capitalism seems to work, isn't it? That if you're there, you're working. If you're not there, you're drinking wine and eating chocolates and, you know, watching Netflix. It's not the case. You know, a lot of us have worked incredibly hard in order to get us this position, and it'll be hours and hours of planning, of which primary school teachers don't know if they're going to be doing online learning on Monday or if they're going to be in work. How can a government let this happen to the point where, you know, they're going to be having to pull out online lessons with hours to spare? It's appallingly rude, as well as incredibly damaging to the education of our young people.
They're not in anybody's interest.
No, we need planning. But the problem is that it means difficult decisions have to be made. And we know that Boris Johnson does not like making any difficult decisions, and he just runs down the clock until there is no decision to be made. The decision has been taken out of his hands. And it's the teachers and the unions that are stepping up and being responsible here, because we're led by a giant baby.
Immortal phrase to finish an answer with.
Yes.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm scanning for. Oh, I heard something there. I'll go to Brent, who I can see is raising a hand.
Hi guys. First of all, thanks Vix for all you're doing. You've been pretty much on point watching. Like yourself, I'm a union rep and a Green, and it's been interesting watching. You've pretty much matched the unions and outmaneuvered Labour in many aspects. And not that you want to or playing politics with it. I thought it's genuine. I know it is genuine, and that's the honest thing about it. Because one of the things that upset me at the last general election was I stood in the last general election as a teacher, and I got a phone call from the NEU saying, you speak to your rep about standing up for schools. And I'm like, you're speaking to a guy who's actually standing for the general election. And they produced leaflets showing how many Labour pledges, and there was only a handful of Greens because they hadn't contacted us. And I was really upset with that, because I thought, that's not fair. Even though they're meant to be non-affiliated, there was an extreme bias towards Labour. And what's been really good is to see that they've shown their true colours in many ways. And not that I take any gloating for it, but we have been consistently backing the union. But we need to make sure that people can see that, and that we start to win people over. And that's one of the things that we consistently have to do. The other thing, obviously, is this is not a strike. The teachers are not going on strike. We need to make that very clear and communicate that, because the right-wing media is going to go straight down the commie route, and they'll go down our route of we are being, you know, communists, and we're all part of this left establishment that's, you know, out to undermine the whole stereotype of the teacher bashing. So two things I'd say about that. One, our teachers need support and need to know that there are people on their side, and that we need to make that very clear and say, look, you've got a home with us here. We'll look after you, not just us, but the union. We care about you. We value you, because there's a lot of people at the moment feeling very hard done by within the teaching profession. If the teacher bashing has increased exponentially, and that's not fair, because they don't deserve it. They generally the doctors aren't getting that, care workers aren't getting. It's like the free season on teachers is not something I've seen in a very, very long time. It's disgusting, actually. So if we can provide a little bit of that comfort, a little bit of reassurance for teachers, that you're not alone, we're with you on this, your union's with you on this, that will really help as well. The other thing is, of course, that we are only following the SAGE advice, because as the union said to us this morning, SAGE found out on December 21st all about this, and the unions found out 2 days ago. that Sage had this advice, told it to the government, and the government ignored it. So the narrative is they've lied to us. Schools are not safe. They weren't safe before, but the new strain is blowing them completely out of the water. They've got no credibility whatsoever. And we need to reinforce that schools are not safe, and that we are being responsible and mature because we are following the science, we're following Sage, independent Sage. And then secondly, not only are we following the science, we're actually following orders, staying at home and working from home. We are going to be staying at home and working from home. We're not disobeying the government. In fact, we're obeying the government the way the government's not obeying the government. So I think we flip that on them and say, look, actually, we're following the science, like you said, and we're staying at home, like you said, and now we can work from home. What's your problem? Because they'll spin this, of course, that, you know, we're stepping out of line. How dare we? And we flip it back to them and go, actually, hold on a second. We're just following your advice. And that puts them in a checkmate, because then they have to come out and say, no, their advice is wrong. So we have them in a kind of bind there of, we're only following your advice, which is to stay at home where it's safe, rather than going to school, which is clearly not safe. Here's your evidence. And I mean, I did that to, I rung into LBC. I've done that a couple of times to Grant Shapps. I put him on the spot. And I put him on the spot and says, no, why are you ignoring schools? And his answer was to completely ignore schools and come out with testing. It was hilarious. And everybody watched that went, he just completely ignored schools because he had no answer. They have no answer for us at the moment, because every answer they have is quite simply either they've lied and they're hoping that the vaccination is like a golden shot. They think it's going to get them out of jail free card. It's not a chance of it. They think this vaccination is going to get them off the hook. And they think mass testing is going to get them off the hook. And that's what they're going to sell. And that's not fair on us, because both of those are so far off that we need immediate stuff now. The last thing I'd say as well is that we also tie this into the chronic underfunding. Quite simply, in the last 10 years, we have had, this is the free market education. And when Vix was saying about how different schools are, I nearly walked from education recently because a trust took over my school. And I hung in there and I hung in there and I hung in there, because some of these trusts are absolutely ruthless. Those people who backed the government said that schools were safe happen to be from those trusts. And they're free marketeers, and they are scaring their staff. And there are a lot of staff out there in some schools who basically, the head teacher comes in and 30 staff are out the door, and then supply staff are brought in. So what we've also got is we've got to get more people in unions and more people confident that they can join unions, because there's been a chipping away in the last generation of unions are evil, and people are afraid. I mean, I've had some of my colleagues this morning, I had to ring them up and say, look, you're not getting any trouble with this Section 44. I'll deal with it. I'll speak to the head teacher. And I've already spoken to my head teacher on their behalf and says, I've spoken to my members and they would like to invoke it. Not one of them sort of on their own. But I've done that myself and said to him, look, it's on me. I'm the union representative. I will deal with you directly. But there's a lot of schools that don't have union representatives that have the moxie that I would have. And they're falling between the gaps. So the last thing I'd say about that is we need to get more people into unions, but also more people getting in the likes of what we're doing here within the green movement as well, because the two are definitely joined together, and our allegiances are joined together. And as this labour movement moves away over to Storm or Blur territory, there's a massive gap there at the moment, a massive gap to be filled, where we can have a huge amount of political capital by doing the right thing. And it's not because we're playing politics, it's genuinely because we're in the right on this. We are morally in the right, but we need to show people that we are in the right and counter the right wing sort of spin on this, because I'll be a commie tomorrow.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Brent. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And it's good to tie it into the chronic underfunding, you're right, and the divide and rule that's been going on. But it takes a situation like this, doesn't it, for people to realise what the unions are for? You know, even though actually with a Section 44, you can write that to your head teacher by yourself. You don't need a union to back you up. This is not industrial action. But when you do it by yourself, you're much more vulnerable than when you've got an excellent rep like yourself that's putting that on their shoulders and saying, I will make that communication. I was a bit concerned I think it was a local rep call I was in at lunchtime, where somebody said, well, what if there's one person in the school? And they said, well, the school will just say, sorry, year 3 can't come in that day. I mean, that's not at all helpful, because then all the parents are going to be, you know, feeling a difficult physical relationship with that teacher, thinking they're at home drinking wine and on Netflix, rather than actually working, but working distantly. So it really does need collective action here, and this is why we have unions, isn't it?
Done. I'm just scanning the call to see if there are any more. Oh, Nicola, I can see. Go for Nicola.
Hi, my name's Nicola Day. I'm an NEU member, and I work 2 days a week teaching English in a school, and I do 3 days supply around that. So I'm also a counsellor, but it's good because it gives me an opportunity to see what's going on in schools across the whole city. And I have to say, I've just never had such an exhausting term as last term. I wanted to take a day off each week to deal with my counsellor work, but because I was just inundated with supply work, I ended up working solidly throughout, because I mean, in one school towards the end there were like 20 supply staff, and it was crucifying the school budgets to have to pay for that many supply staff, because teachers were and students were just going off. So you didn't even need to be a scientist to realize that something was happening. I didn't know what you thought, Vix, about a question really is, to be told about this mutant virus the weekend before Christmas. I feel like we were really lied to, like they've held that information back, and they almost the government waited till the end of term, so that schools, were right up until the end of term, and then that next day, that Saturday, they were telling us that we couldn't have Christmas because of this. I hadn't heard much about that, so I was concerned about that. In terms of the whole laptop issue, I sit on the Children's Education Committee here in Peterborough, and I know for a fact that there was some money put aside for our department for our education for schools for laptops, and that got dramatically cut over time by the government. So we haven't been able to, as you know, Vix, provide the laptops, also. I mean, I work 2 days a week at school, and what we've decided to do, my head teachers decided that from the 11th, nobody will come in. We'll do online learning with our year 11s. We don't have A-levels. And then from the 18th, everybody will go back. And that's particularly because I work where there's in a school with a high Asian population amongst our people. So, given sort of the intergenerational household and the mixing, and also the fact that the centre of Peterborough, where most of my students are from, has very high rates of COVID at the moment. What's been disappointing is I've tried to talk within my council to the Director of Education, and he's really following the government line. You can see he keeps saying to me, oh, we're not that bad in comparison to national figures. I'm really trying to say we're being cautious, it will be fine. So I guess my other question as well is, how will, obviously the union members there'll be 16,000, 20,000 on a call tomorrow. And I think that will give people hope and courage to take this action. But I guess as a Green Party, we need to really encourage, to show our support, continue to show our support, both in local press and national press, so that people feel that it's not just them that's taking that action, that it's something they can do. Whilst I'm a secondary teacher, I just really feel for all my colleagues in the primary sector. They're just being thrown to the dogs, and it's just awful. So yeah, and I'd really like to also see, is the press statement on the website? Because I'd like to send that to my local press if that's possible. But yeah, they're my thoughts. Brilliant, thank you. But I could say so much, but I'm so concerned, and particularly for our older teachers, our older support staff that are more vulnerable. We have teachers that are nearing retirement age. And, when you were talking earlier, I could feel the passion. I was nearly crying when you were talking, because it's been awful for teachers this year. And it's been really hard, and for students. I've had year 11s in tears on the floor because they think they've lost all their learning, and and it's just, it's been really difficult. So thank you, Vix, for everything you've done.
No, I thank you, Nicola, and it really goes to show why we need Greens elected, isn't it? Like Nicola's there in Peterborough, talking to the Director of Education, writing in the local press, working as a teacher. That's why we need Greens elected, in order to do that. This is not just a situation for us teachers, this is a situation for the whole community. There's only one thing I was going to bring up on there. You were talking about, the mutant virus, and when did they know, and trust has broken down, hasn't it? And we were told in March that one of the most important things for how to deal with a pandemic is trust in the government or the scientists. And that's why when we had all those stay-at-home videos, the public announcements, it was Chris Whitty that was in them, because he was seen as, you know, a professional scientist who was telling us, because trust is important. Trust is completely broken down. On the one hand, it's broken down through irresponsible people, the people that are saying it's all a hoax, the people that are saying we're making it up, the people that are outside the A&E in London, you know, in a big crowd of them. And then it's broken down with the responsible people. This is why teachers are making these responsible stances. As Brent pointed out, the science is completely on the side of what the teachers are saying. They are the ones who are taking the responsible action and the difficult decisions because governments aren't doing it. And this, we should never be, as a country, as a nation, in this position where we're at, where trust has completely gone now. And one thing you can do is to look after your health, the health of your family, the health of your community, but you know, not much wider, because we have a government who are completely disregarding the health of the nation. But I could say they seem to just, with another 1,000 people have died, we'll get the vaccination at some point. The vaccination will not help schools. Young people are not going to be vaccinated. It is not being tested on young people. The vaccination is there for vulnerable, for older people, and people that are working in frontline positions. It's not there for children. So the virus would still transmit, even if we all had the vaccination in school. You know, we need much more longer term solutions than a vaccination.
I'm just looking down the list. I can see that Paul's you've got your hand up.
Jay's had their hand up for a while.
Oh, sorry. Jay, go ahead. Sorry, Paul. Jay
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Thank you for what you're doing, and I agree with you entirely. But I spoke to a teacher recently who said it's impossible to keep teenagers off the streets if they're not in school. And he says they will do more damage in terms of spreading the virus on the streets than they would if they're in school. I don't agree with him, but what would you say?
That's completely wrong. I can understand why people are fearful of teenagers on the streets, but a teenagers on the street will be in a group of maybe a dozen, right? And they'll be outside. What we're talking about here is people in classes of 30, very small rooms, because we've not invested in our schools in the last 40 years, you know, poor ventilation, you know, seeing another, 5 lessons, another 150 young people in an enclosed environment, sharing door handles, sharing toilets, sharing tables, sharing, you know, spaces where they eat food. It's actually much safer to have young people at home or maybe spending a bit of time with their friends outside than inside the classroom at this point, you know, in a crisis situation. In the worst place you can put, look at the World Health Organization. I shared one of their illustrations last week where they said you should be in alert about cramped, crowded situations. There's another C. And all those 3 things are what schools are. They are cramped, they are crowded, they are noisy. You know, you wouldn't go spend time in there. You wouldn't spend time in a shop that was like that. So you certainly wouldn't spend 6 or 7 hours a day inside a poorly ventilated, crowded area. You know, I can understand why they're fearful of young people being on the street, because a lot of people are fearful, especially of teenage boys on the street, but it's safer than inside school, sorry.
Thank you very much.
Can I add to that, Jay? If there's one generation that can stay at home and stay in their bedroom, if the internet goes down and Minecraft goes down and Fortnite goes down, we're in big trouble, let's be honest. If there's one generation that can stay in Command Center 101, known as AKA the bedroom, this is the generation. You know, I mean, if this thing was happening 30 years ago, we'd be in bigger trouble. But this generation of children, the vast majority of them, and actually youth crime's gone like that. But people's perception is a bit different to the actual reality. People's perception is that kids these days are phenomenal. And the vast majority of them have handled this extremely well. They're extremely resilient. And again, that's something we need to think about, sort of getting that message out there. You know, 6 months disruption to kids' education. I grew up in a war zone in the middle of the Troubles, for God's sake, with my school buildings being blown up by the IRA. And here I am as an educator myself. You know, our ancestors got through World War II with 5 years living in the countryside with Captain Tom, what do you call him? You know, good night, Mr. Tom. So kids are resilient. Kids are kids, and they have done extremely, extremely well. But the vast majority of kids at the moment are following the instructions, and they are a lot safer out of school than they are, as Vix says, in school, because school is an absolute melting pot. And anybody that turns around and says that there's no evidence of transmission in school, well, if I can find out which kid gave me the flu last year, I'd be lucky. You know what I mean? If I could find out which one gave me the cold the year before, I'd be very, very lucky. Our whole school system is so inconsistent. Our school buildings are Victorian in some places with porta cabins. I mean, I did international schools a couple of years ago, and I was ashamed to take people from Dubai around schools in Derbyshire because they were 15 years old, their schools, and they were apologizing to me for how bad their facilities were. I've got more leaks in my roof than the Titanic, for God's sake, in some of our schools. So no, schools are just not COVID safe. They're not fit for purpose, never mind at the best of times. But this global pandemic has done two things. One, in the long run, we need to have a bigger conversation about the nature of education and how we educate our children, and the education funding situation, which I think is a perfect opportunity to have that conversation and say, what's the purpose of our education? Look at exams. Look at the way we are mentally destroying a generation of children. Like Nicola was saying, kids breaking down to me in absolute fits and howls of rage. You know, I mentioned the 2 words to kids in January, and some of them had nearly a nervous breakdown. I mentioned the word mock exam, and that was enough to see some of the girls just literally come to me in absolute, I'm so far behind, sir. I'm so far behind. I'm gonna fail. And a lot of these children in exam classes are worried that they are going to be in the same situation as what we saw in July. And they are going to be in that same situation. And that's what we frontline teachers are having to pick up, the mental health pieces. My wife's a mental health professional at the moment, and we're having a mental health crisis, not just with young people, with old people. It's criminal what they've got, actually, to say criminally negligent that the government have done to schools, never mind to this point. But to even now ignore the science at this stage, but you'll get that right wing sort of like, oh, the kids are going to cause all this trouble. Well, let their parents deal with them. There's too much of that. I failed my driving test. I don't blame a driving instructor when I fail my driving test. I'm the one that went the wrong direction, nearly crashed the car, not my driving instructor. So we have to have that conversation as well about, because all of a sudden all these people are waxing lyrical about education as if it's the magic bullet to solve all society's ills. Same people were silent when budgets were cut. So they can't have it both ways. If they feel so clearly about education, we hold them to account and say, so you think education is so important all of a sudden? Where were you in the last 6 or 7 years? Where were you a couple of years ago? Where were you when the budgets were cut? You were non-existent. So they can't have it both ways, and we have to call them out on that. We really do. Otherwise, we're going to lose the best and brightest of our teaching staff, because they're just getting so fed up with this, so fed up with the lack of support, and so fed up with being treated by an employer who doesn't care about them. By parents who sometimes, I'll be honest with you, we're the battering ram. I've had some of my colleagues being absolutely battered by some parents because they're the only person they could get, and we're taking the blame for a lot of problems. And it's just not fair, really. It isn't. So the whole kids being out in the streets, that's a red herring, because the majority of them are in playing Fortnite, to be honest.
By November, Octavian had abandoned Rome and fled north, and Antony had reoccupied the capital.
Cool. Some impromptu Roman history there. Love it. We'll go. I can see a few hands have been up for a while in the participants list, so I'll go to Paul. Paul next.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. Hi, Vix. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Paul.
Hey, just a quick one, really. I wanted to know how supportive the TUC had been in all of this. Because they can be a bit of a mixed bag sometimes, as I've discovered this summer with all the art stuff. And also, what's the interlink with the other sort of, well, other unions in general? Because there's the other teachers union, there's GMB have workers in schools, Unison have workers in schools. And actually, I mean, I'm obviously on Equity Council, so I've been speaking on our WhatsApp group amongst the equity counsellors, because there's going to be a lot of equity members who also have day jobs in schools and things like that. So I suppose it's kind of, it's a part question about how's the link up going and how's that all working, and also how we can help provide the link up. What would you say to me as an equity counsellor in sort of a position of governance in a union? What do you want me to do? Do I want to be passing motions? Do I want to be getting every single equity member mobilised? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. What would you suggest? What's a good idea?
That is a really really big questions, Paul.
I know. Easy one.
I probably can't answer all of that. I haven't had any link with the TUC. The NEU haven't said that. I've just seen Matthew sharing. Is that the official NEU petition there, Matthew?
Yeah, so that's a link to the NEU tweet where they link.
And it's a joint one, is it, with Unison?
I believe so. They tag Unison in it.
Oh, okay. Because I know that locally, some people that have been working in schools, members of Unison, have left Unison and joined the NEU now. It's just a massive recruitment for the NEU, I guess, because now in the last, 2-3 years, they've now changed to being an education union and not a teachers union. And that shows the strength of having one union to represent all people who work in education. How to support? I suppose it's just through showing support as citizens, isn't it, that we need in order to make sure that that teachers feel empowered to do this. So that can happen from a passing motions point of view, absolutely, for sure, to make people feel by themselves, but also just expressing support for local, individual people, colleagues that you know. I don't know what the TUC have done. I don't, if anybody else can let us know, that would be great.
Thank you.
Just scanning the virtual room. Sorry, it's quite difficult to see. I'm going to go down the list. I can see that. Sorry, it's a nightmare. Bob Beggs from Rugby. You've had yours raised for a while.
Yeah, hi Vix.
Hi Bob.
Just a point and a couple of questions. You described the environment that you have to work in, something that you clearly from the description is physically risky, but something that you've not mentioned yet that obviously affects your immune system and exposure to infections, etc. And that is stress. And it's clear that teachers are suffering from not just exhaustion and fatigue, but real stress as well, which will only add to the risk of infection. And I'm sure you all know that. The other question, I've got is something you've mentioned already about the vaccine and trust. It's clear now that there seems to be problems with the supply of the vaccine. All we got during the summer were massive numbers in the millions and the hundreds of millions. Now we're getting down to the actual delivery. And we're getting mixed messages about the actual rollout and the whether you get 1 dose or 2 doses and whether you can mix and match, which is clearly causing a lot of, which is only adding to the negative views about the risk of the virus, of the vaccine itself. So that's not the great solution that has been promised at the moment. And so the next question is, what about timeframes? I mean, I think a month ago we were thinking, oh, it'll be all over by Easter. Now perhaps we're thinking, well, this could carry on for at least another 6 months, possibly the rest of the year. And we need and you talked about planning and strategy. Well, we need a completely different strategy about the education of our children in terms of the long-term risk. Have you got anything you can say about that? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. You're spot on and right in identifying those difficulties, especially recently the vaccine. I've got people on the Isle of Wight who are saying, why aren't the soldiers there? Why aren't they vaccinating us round the clock? They have this misplaced faith in the government, that the government know what they're doing, and the government have not ordered the vaccines, and the government are ruling by press releases, not actual, logistics. I think you're spot on about the fact that there needs to be plans in place for the summer. If we're talking about Easter even, well, that's effectively how the exam cycle works for year 11 and year 13. They're going to be taking their exams a few weeks after that. So even if the best case scenario that the government is saying, we're going to have disruption for that, but they're still, in England, they're supposed to be taking exams in May, June time. That really needs to be seriously looked at, and what will replace those things in a planned and organised way. they're still insisting they're going to do SATs exams for year 6, which is the most pointless exam ever, you know, apart from the ones that they do for the 4-year-olds, which they take the exam and file it away in a filing cabinet for 7 years and don't even look at it or make any. It's shown, as it's shown with our NHS, hasn't it? And it's shown with our local government. It's shown the huge gaps and problems that we have in our examination system, that we have in our schooling, our disparate, you know, sectioning off into academies and free schools and private schools. You know, it's shown all the reasons why our policies, our green policies, are the right policies. Absolutely. However, we don't have the power. We don't have the elected members. And it shows again why we're here and why we need to be in this party and why we need to make sure that we have those elected members. Yeah, immediately we're looking at Monday morning, but once Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning out of the way, we need to be pushing the government about its long-term plans for the rest of this academic year, because, you know, we cannot be left in a position where, as a teacher, I am making a judgment about whether young people deserve an exam or not. And sadly, the arguments that I had with colleagues about people who value girls who've got nice handwriting, as opposed to people that are, you know, just pull it out at the end and they're smart enough. It's horrible. You know, the arguments I had when, unfortunately, race was brought into it, which it shouldn't be, but it was. You know, judgments that were made. We should not be leaving teachers. It's not fair on teachers to leave them in that position where they're making a, unfortunately, subjective view. We need to have a set of teacher assessments or a set of assessments or something in order to make sure our young people can be rewarded. But we can't be leaving it just up to opinion at the end of, you know, Easter. And unfortunately, this government don't like to make decisions. They like to leave it to the last minute, and that will leave it up to a subjectivity, which as a teacher, I don't want to be placed in that position at all. I want to be able to look back and say, this is why these A-level students, you know, deserve this. This is what they've done all the way through, you know, at this situation. Yeah, but immediately we've got to think about Monday morning. But once those next few days have gone, you know, we need to be thinking much more about, especially our year 11 and year 13 students, especially the year 13s, to be honest, who've had an absolute horrendous 2 years failure to support them in their learning, but we need to be able to support them to make their next steps.
Thanks very much. I can see there are a few more hands raised in the participants list, so we'll just go to those. I can see Steve Williams.
Hi, and good to see you. Hi, good to see you again, Vix. And you know, you're doing a great job and exposing what is obviously this ludicrous position and dangerous position, if you like, of the government. You know, being the one party spokesman that's actually taking a moral high ground, and that's absolutely great. I mean, I work in across a lot of schools, as I think you probably know, and it has been enormously difficult, an enormously difficult time, particularly towards the end of the last autumn term. And you know, that's why it really annoys me when I hear government spokespeople saying, and actually Labour Party spokespeople also saying, well, you know, we've got to get the schools open because we've got to get the children back in school. And there's a valid premise there that actually it is better for children and young people to be in school to be out of school. Actually, the reality is, I was talking to a head teacher from one of the South London primary schools towards the end of last term, staff of about 76, and there were as many as 36 members of staff who were off because they either had COVID or they were or they were self-isolating towards the end of last term. I went through a number of of children that were in school. It was a tiny number of children in school. And of course, you know, we know that one of the best ways of actually getting the children and young people back into school is to actually to make schools safe first. So, you know, that kind of delay would actually reap huge benefits. And I think that's particularly relevant where we are trying to secure the support of the trade unions in terms of supporting, you know, the action, for example, of the NEU, because I mean, it strikes me that the argument that, you know, children need to be in school is the argument that's actually used to persuade, you know, workers in other trade unions that it's not particularly, you know, that it's not particularly clever thing to do for the, you know, for the teaching unions to be saying, you know, schools need to be closed. Well, actually, I think we need to be blowing that myth, because I do think the broader support of the broader union movement is something which is actually very important. And obviously, the more that we can do, you know, as a Green Party you know, as a Green Party trade union group, the more that we can be doing to be actually pointing out that utter fallacy, I think the better.
Yeah, I think that's right, Steve. It's hard, isn't it? Because our message has got to be to support vulnerable young people, to support disadvantaged families, to keeping our schools open as much as possible for that pastoral work. But also, as Greens, we appreciate that not all learning happens in the classroom. You know, I have a 14-year-old son. As you can imagine, as Brent was saying earlier, he's not a big fan of Minecraft, but he's a 14-year-old boy, right? He really found it difficult to do a lot of the work during lockdown. He did some, but he didn't do, I say, he did 50% of it. So he didn't really do much work from March to September. But he came back in September, he enjoyed his lessons, and he went and aced the work at the end of the term. You know, because this idea that we have to be in school every single day, and if we're not in school, we're not learning, is just wrong. I've seen a number of testimonies from people who were refugees from Bosnia, missed 3, 4, 5 years of learning, and yet still managed to achieve and go to university and get a good science degree and be great citizens, right? However, that isn't the message at the moment for us to put into the domain, I don't think, because I think people misinterpret it. A bit like Brent was saying earlier, it sounds very communist, or it sounds very flaky, it sounds very kooky. You know, really, we need to be making sure we support, in particular, as Melanie was pointing out, you know, those vulnerable, those families that are, you know, really rely on schools to be able to keep an eye on young people, to be young people's mental health. We do have to still talk about that. It's a very difficult line to tread, I think, as Greens. I think this is maybe a conversation we can have once this is all over. This idea that, you know, young people must be doing X amount of homework and they must be, you know, progressing in a form like this. You know, this idea of flight paths and one level every year. It's gobbledygook. It's not how our brains work. It's not how we work as human beings. But I think that it's going to teach us a lot of things that we can put into practice, hopefully when all of this is over, talking about how learning needs to happen outside of the classroom, not just in the classroom. And we shouldn't just be making people go to school, you know, just this idea that that's the only way you can learn. It's not true. At the same time, we need to protect vulnerable people in particular.
And I think, Vix, moving forward as well, as you say, that message would tie in really well with our position on home education.
Yeah.
Because that's something I took, obviously, having home educated for a long time and been involved with our policy rewrite at that time.
Yeah.
It is a really sort of important message that learning does not take place in classrooms exclusively. And my son had a very similar experience. You know, he sort of did bits and bats, came out, did his first test back in the classroom, got a 9.
Yeah, 14. Exactly. My son's got a 9. Like what? Where did that come from? So,
But there is a lot of interesting research that came out from after Katrina and after other sort of disasters where children missed months and months and months and months and months of school, and there was no sort of emergency online provision, you know, and obviously it's going to be a lot better and a lot different this time. I see the prep that goes on in my house, where actually children did do better because the pressure was taken off them. There wasn't that stress, the exam stress, the focus on this, the, you know, as was said earlier about the sort of the mock exams and the breakdown and the, you know, that was all gone. And so they can just sort of learn and take things in, and formal learning isn't necessarily where we have to go. And I think that's going to be a really interesting messaging to go forward, and to talk about those policies and how they overlap, and how schools and home education actually could have similarities and could learn from each other. You know, I think there's something really interesting around there that we can take forward.
Yeah, thank you.
Three quick points on three different things there. We have naturally a lot more young people vote for us. And a lot of the educational policies are not creating very happy young students. They're not creating very healthy, happy young students. And I went in and did to a college and did a debate against Anna Sudbury, which was hilarious. She got 0.5% of the vote. For some reason, she didn't strike a chord with young people. And the Conservative candidate got 9% because his whole thing was get Brexit done. And when it comes down to it, we are really pushing young people far too far in the exam system. And we do need to have that conversation about what is the purpose of education and what is the whole thing about it. And as Greens, yeah, we have a more holistic approach. The problem with that is, at the moment, you're right, Vix, we would be considered to be, this is not the time to have that conversation. However, we can start to drip feeding that in of, you know, let's talk about CAMS, let's talk about mental health, let's talk about the whole levels. I mean, that's what the whole exam system highlighted, was how unfair it is, especially to disadvantaged working class, especially kids with disadvantages, which brings me to the second thing I wanted to say there was free school meals is not resolved. I'd say within 2 or 3 weeks, if schools are shut down again as they were from March, we will have Marcus Rashford on the phone again. And I don't think they've resolved that. And in fact, what they have done is they hived it out to Eden Red, who was a French company, and we found corruption in there. I mean, I had a classic example in our local area where 81 secondary schools did not take up the free schools meals offer, because the local MP then turned out and said, there's no issue with free school meals in our area because no secondary schools took up the offer of free school meals. That is because our investigation showed no secondary school knew about the free school meals. But they got away with that because the media ran with that and says, see, free school meals is a red herring, and that's what they'll do. And we are going to see in the next couple of weeks a response to, if we are going to shut schools down, we need to sort of counter that with what policies we will put in place to rescue these kids, and how will we rescue them. And part of that rescuing will be mental health, but physical health, but not just rescue them, but rescue the community. Because if we go down the route of supporting the unions, we leave ourselves exposed to, well, how do we recover? So we do need to think about what policies we would immediately put in place, knowing that in 2 or 3 weeks' time, free school meals is going to hit the news again. So I think we can predict, as we did in March, April, May, June, where these issues are going to be. And I think if we get ahead of the curve in some ways, but I suspect free school meals in 2 or 3 weeks is going to be the next scandal of all of a sudden where people are hammered and they're down the pecking order when it comes to getting any sort of benefits. And those are the people, sadly, that what they'll do is they may be directed towards us, and they may start blaming the teachers, the unions, and if we, the Green Movement, are going to back the teachers and the unions in this, by extension, we could be then blamed as well. So we have to be very careful that we don't put ourselves into a corner and then the narrative is spun of, well, you wanted the kids off school, you're the one to blame, because people will hate you for telling the message, even though it's right, the message that we're saying. We need to be careful that we're not the ones carrying the baby, basically, for issues that aren't ours, because that's how they'll spin that, won't they? They'll turn it back on us and say, you're the ones that wanted the schools closed, you're the one who's causing my child's education to be disrupted. And you try and reason with that, but if their message is better than our message, then we're in a bit of trouble in that.
Chair, do you know that Danny and Martin have had their hands up for a long time?
Sorry, it's really difficult to get around everyone. I know everyone's got so much to say. I think what we'll do, because we do need to move on to the rest of the agenda. We did have dessert first, but we necessarily have to get to the vegetables at some point. We'll go to Martin for one last question, I think, and then we'll move on to the body of the meeting. At which point people are more than welcome to stay. It's usually some fairly light updates, but you're also very welcome to go if you've got other ways to spend your Saturday evening. So we'll go to Martin.
thing really is what our next steps are as a local Green Party. And I think it's a very good statement now on the website that's now going out. But we need to work with the other trade unions as well, and perhaps try and persuade them to stand with the NEU. So as a united trade union response about everybody involved in education. That's being built at the moment. 15,000 people on the NEU tomorrow is clearly a very powerful base from which to work. So as a trade union group, we're not just one union, the NEU. So I think we as a group could write to the other unions and ask them to work alongside the NEU in a concerted action. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. Yes.
Does anyone, do you want to come back on that?
That was a nice sort of way to sort of bring it, and I can see Nicola's asking in the chat as well about what we can do. We could do sort of local media stuff, but you're right, it's working across the union movement, and as Paul was saying, you know, using the TUC, using equity, you know, not just the unions that you think of, like UCU and Unison, but other unions as well, working alongside that. It was horrible that governors have had to be put in that position before Christmas, that teachers are now in that position, isn't it, to take responsibility when the government are refusing to do that. So you're spot on in recognising what governors, the difficult situation that governors have been led in order to protect not just their young people, but protect their staff and protect their community that the school's in. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Vix. And I've just seen on Twitter actually quite a few of the larger unions are sharing the NEU petition, which is obviously only a start, but I think shows that they're certainly invested in seeing this happen. And as everyone's like said really clearly this afternoon, when teachers and other providers of ultimately like crucial public services without which society collapses want to take action of any sort, that community support is really important. And workers who are organised in other sectors have a real role to play in making sure that that community support is there, and that we know which side we're on. So yeah, thanks so much, Vix, for speaking to us, and also to the other teachers who've contributed to a really good discussion as well. Weren't expecting it, but it's definitely enriched the whole afternoon. So thanks so much to Nicola as well, and anyone who I've missed there. But now